So today's topic is our super safety checklist. And I put this checklist together to, like I said, really help you with risk management and maintaining a very safe and healthy program for your employees and for your children. Now, this is a non-COVID training today. So I'm sure we'll talk about COVID at some point throughout this list, but just so you'll know, this is a non-COVID training today. We've been putting so much focus on enhanced health practices and keeping everyone healthy and keeping everyone in our program. I thought it would be a good idea, especially at the beginning of the school year right now, to kind of go over some supervision and risk management items that are non-COVID related, because all of our focus has been on COVID here lately. We don't want to miss the big picture and drop the ball on some of the other areas. So I have what I call my super safety checklist, and if you go to my website, timthetrainer.com, go to documents, you can download this checklist that I'm going to go over with you today. Now, I'm not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on every item that's on this list because we would be here all day long if I were to go into detail on everything. I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the items I have on this checklist and why I have these items on this checklist to help you, again, maintain a very safe program for your employees. So when I put this checklist together, my intention here was, I recommend at least once a year you use this checklist in a staff meeting. So go over all of the items on this checklist with your employees. Part of your new hire orientation, you want to go over these items definitely. But everything that I put on here are items that we need constant reminders on. So it's not something you have a conversation one time, that you constantly are having a conversation with your employees on these particular items. So like I said, at least once a year, use this as an agenda for your staff meeting. And again, you can download this document off of my website, timthetrainer.com, under documents. So the first item I have on here is, do you know your center's crisis plan? So in the event that you had, let's say, an intruder, someone that comes into your facility and they want to cause harm, do you have a plan in place to keep everybody safe? Now, of course, this is part of our emergency preparedness plan that is required by child care regulations. And you need to make sure you're practicing this. 4 times a year is what is required by child care regulations. But what is your crisis plan in the event of an emergency or a significant event? Now, what I always recommend that you do when creating your crisis plan, contact your local first responders and ask them to come out, walk your building with you, walk your premises with you, and have your first responders sit down with you and help create a plan. I know there's a lot of companies out there that advertise, they'll come in and do a training for you on what to do in the event of an active shooter or an intruder. And I know that those companies have good intentions. You just got to be careful because sometimes they can scare people more than they can prepare them. So I like using your first responders because, number one, they don't charge you anything. But number two, if you were to have an actual significant event, when you call 911, your first responders are going to be the people that show up. It's kind of crazy. I'm surprised that we are not required to share our emergency preparedness plan with our first responders. To me, that would make perfect sense that if I was in a lockdown, if I had an intruder and the first responder showed up at my facility, they need to know where we're hiding. They need to know where we've placed the children and the employees are at. So that's, again, why I like to get the first responders involved in creating your crisis plan. But as far as a new employee is concerned, or even your existing employees, make sure that you're going over your crisis plan and what that looks like. How do you notify your staff that, they need to go into a lockdown mode? And you need to have a discreet way of doing it. So, for example, one way that I've done it in the past is that if the director ever got on the intercom and called all of the classrooms and said, attention teachers, if you have the red butcher paper, please bring it to the front office. And that was, the code word for something's going on in the building, everyone locked down, all right, or nobody leave your classroom. Or it goes the other way too. If a teacher ever calls to the front office on the intercom and says, hey, director, can you bring me the red butcher paper? That means something's going on and I need you back here right now, all right? Now that you would not use red butcher paper for a aggressive child or a behavioral issue. We're talking about the real deal here, an actual significant event where people's lives are in danger. And you want to change this up, all right? At least once a year, twice a year, whatever is best for your facility. You want to change your crisis plan and change the way that you notify your employees that there is a significant event. The reason why you want to do this is that it might be one of your employees that is coming in to cause harm, especially if you've recently had to terminate an employee or you've got a disgruntled employee. You may need to lock down your building because you're dealing with that situation. So that's why I like to change it up every once in a while too. Even with parents, if you have a disgruntled parent or someone that's really upset with you, if they've been with you for a while, they may pick up on what your crisis plan is. Now, I've also always said that when you share your emergency preparedness plan with your families, which you are required to do so with licensing, don't share everything, all right? So how you notify your employees of a lockdown is something that's going to stay discreet. You're not going to share that with your families because I will tell you, I've had about 5 situations in my career where I've had to lock down my building. One was a high-speed chase that ended behind one of our facilities. And another one was there was a SWAT team, had people, down on the ground with their guns and everything across the street from one of my schools. So we locked down just to make sure everything was safe. The other times that I've had to do lockdowns was one with a disgruntled employee and another one with a disgruntled parent. So think about it. Those are your 2 most likely times to have that. All right. I've got a question coming up on, on the Facebook Live. Does anyone have a panic button? If you can afford to have that installed in your program, I think that's a great idea. I don't know exactly what the cost is or what that would look like. I know a lot of your phone systems that you're putting in nowadays, have some type of panic alert button on it. Something you might want to look into. But it might be something as easy as going to Home Depot or Lowe's and buying a particular doorbell with a particular sound. So that way, again, if you ring that doorbell and everyone hears it, they know to lock down. And it might be different than other doorbells that you have. So really kind of think outside of the box. There's a lot of different ways that you could do this, to where you can maintain a safe environment. And again, depending on your phone system and how it's programmed, your panic button may automatically call 911 in the event of this type of situation. All right. But we all know, over the last couple of years especially, don't ever say that's not going to happen to me. Because we've had a lot of situations, over the last few years that are just unbelievable. And it has happened to us between Hurricane Harvey and now, of course, the pandemic. And you just never know what is around the corner. All right, so that's the first item on my super safety checklist is, do you know your center's crisis plan, and make sure you're sharing that with your staff. The next thing I have on here are, what are my center's policies on playground supervision? Sometimes when we hire employees, we assume there is a level of common sense out there, right? And that proper playground supervision should be common sense. But sometimes not so much. I see a lot of early educators that once they get out onto the playground, they let their guard down. They become complacent. It kind of becomes a break time for the employees while the children are out there playing. When in reality, we have more accidents, we have more injuries, we have more significant events on the playground than any other time of the day. So our playground supervision should be, above and beyond what we're doing in the classroom. You really need to be alert. Your teachers need to be spread out. They need to be zoned, so that we're covering all areas of the playground. So again, this is a good topic to go over with your staff a couple of times a year, and especially new employees. I've even gone as far as, drawing a map of my playground one time. And I was like, okay, if there's one teacher on the playground, you're going to stand in this general area. If there's two teachers on the playground, one's going to be here, one's going to be here. If there's three of y'all, one here, one here, one here. Obviously, I was having some issues at that time, and I had to get very, very detailed. So, you want to make sure you're having these conversations. I would strongly recommend that you put in your policy manual, grounds for immediate termination is an adult sitting on the playground. All right. If you have an adult sitting down on the playground, they are not going to be able to adequately respond to a child that is in need. All right. Especially if the child falls off the playground equipment or they're severely injured. If you've got a teacher down on the ground, they're not going to be able to get over there. The only time that I will allow, an adult to be sitting on the playground is that if the teacher is doing a circle time or doing an activity out on the playground, which I love doing those things, then of course at that point it would be okay. But when the kids are just out there doing their physical activity, the teachers need to be moving around, they need to be engaged, they need to be focused, all right, they need to be responsive. And so you want to make sure that you have all of this in your policies. All right. I actually have a pretty large policy on playground supervision and playground expectations that we have in our employee binder that we give everybody. The third item that I have on my super safety checklist that I encourage you to go over with your employees often is your policy on attendance tracking. All right. How do your teachers know how many children they have at any point in time? All right. And the golden rule, I think we talk about this in every webinar that we do. Document, document, document. But you want to try to have multiple different ways of tracking attendance. I like to get every party, in your program involved in attendance tracking. So, for example, the teachers have their clipboard and they have what I call a transition sheet. So anytime a child comes in, the teacher writes down the child's name, what time did they come in, and then this is a handwritten list. I don't like for this to be computer generated because on my transition sheet, I only want the children that are present that day. And if you do, something that is computer generated, you may have children on that attendance list that are not present that day. So we do our transition sheet. The teacher completes their transition sheet. They write down the child's name, the age of the child, what time did they come in. And every time they transition in the classroom, they take roll. So before they leave to go to the playground, before they leave the classroom, they take roll. Once they get to the playground, they take roll. Before they leave the playground, they take roll. When they get back to the classroom, they take roll. And we keep these documents, indefinitely. So I can go back and I can look on my transition sheet and pretty much recreate the entire day. I can see what took place and the attendance tracking and the teacher doing their part. There's even a part on my transition sheet where teachers sign in and out as well. So let's say, for example, I have to step into a classroom to give a potty break. When I step into the classroom to give a potty break, I'm going to take that transition sheet and I'm going to document what time did I come into the classroom and then what time did I leave. So that again, I've got good, accurate documentation of every adult that's in that room. So that's one way that your adults are involved in attendance tracking. Parents sign their children in and out. All right, so child care regulation requires that you have a method of documenting when the child's day begins and when the child's day ends, and who you're releasing the child to and who's dropping the child off. It does say in the child care minimum standards that this can be done either by the parent or the caregiver. I strongly recommend always that this is done by the parent. The most important thing about the sign in and out sheet is it's that moment in time when the responsibility of the child shifts from parent to caregiver and caregiver to parent. So imagine, running a relay race and you're passing the baton. All right, the moment you pass that baton, now the next person is responsible. Even right now during our pandemic, I still have the clipboards by the front door of the building, and the parents are signing the children in and out. And I know a lot of us have, the computer systems like ProCare, a lot of these different programs that you can utilize to sign children in and out. They're getting really fancy with the way that you're doing that. That's all fine and good if you want to use that. I still like good old-fashioned pen and paper. All right. I think that if you get pulled into a courtroom, all right, that pen and paper is going to be a lot more beneficial to your case than something that you print off of a computer. All right. I always say this in a lot of my management classes, that when you're making a decision in your program, always ask yourself, how would this decision be perceived by a jury? Okay. And if I can walk into a courtroom with a lot of documentation that's handwritten and signed, that's going to be a lot better than a report that you print off of a computer. All right. So, if you're using, ProCare or Kid Reports or Bright Wheels or Hi Mama, that's all fine and good, but I still like the good old-fashioned pen and paper in addition to those nice systems. So that's how I get my parents involved in attendance tracking. Then I have my director or assistant directors do half-hour ratio checks. So every 30 minutes, a member of management is walking around the building, walking into the classrooms, not just standing at the door, and walking into the classroom and documenting how many employees, how many children are present. There's a lot of different reasons why I recommend the half-hour ratio checks, or as often as you can. Number one, being a director, we get super busy, and we tend to neglect the most important thing in our program, which is the classrooms. So this forces you to get up and move around the building, every 30 minutes or as often as possible. But it's also, you're documenting how many employees, how many children. You need to have accurate data on how many humans do you have in your building at any point in time. You could have a significant event at any moment, whether it be a tornado or a fire or an active shooter, and when the emergency personnel shows up, they need to know exactly how many people were in that building, all right? You can't just say, well, I think I had about 100, and you really had 102. Then that would be 2 kids they're not looking for. So I like the half-hour ratio checks because, again, it helps you stay on top of how many humans you have in your building. And it's great documentation for child care regulations whenever they want proof that the director is supervising the staff. All right, so that's good stuff. I got a very good question on the Facebook Live. How long do you have to keep attendance papers or records? Okay. I'm not going to go into the big elaborate answer that I normally go into right here for the sake of time. But basically, a parent can sue you or press charges against you until the child turns 21. All right. But then, even after the child turns 21, they can sue you or press charges against you. All right. So the statute of limitations is very, very broad when it comes to something happening to a child in one of our programs. So to answer your question on how long do we keep attendance records, my recommendation is indefinitely. All right. Now I know that's going to be a lot of storage, a lot of papers that you're storing, but y'all know what CYA stands for, right? Cover your assets. All right. You got to protect yourself, and I would keep those indefinitely. And you can do that either, actual paper or, electronic if you want to scan and save things, as long as they're accessible down the road. Make sure that you're doing that. So I talked about the teachers being involved in attendance tracking, the parents being involved in attendance tracking, the director being involved in attendance tracking, but we're not done because now we're going to get the children involved in attendance tracking. So what I like to do is have a home school board, is what we call them, where we've got a nice picture of a house and a nice picture of your school. And I like to use real life pictures and not cartoon or fantasy pictures. And then every single child, has a little, I've done it with magnets, I've done it with Velcro, I've done it with pocket charts, we've done it all kinds of different ways. But whenever the child comes in the morning, they move their picture from home to school. And when they go home in the afternoon, they move their picture from school to home. So this is also getting the kids some accountability. And it's also fantastic for those difficult transitions when the child's having a hard time separating from the parent in the morning. Doing the home school board is very helpful because it's a job. And that job creates an act of service, which creates empathy, which helps with the self-regulation process. So there's a lot of importance behind those home school boards. It's not just decoration. And I like it too because if I step into a classroom to, give a potty break or whatnot, I like to be able to look down and see exactly who I've got. All right. How many kids are there? And I'm a very visual person, so I want to see it. All right. In addition to having my transition sheet. So they're really fantastic. And the kids are great at using these. And they're great at keeping each other accountable. Johnny didn't, move his card to school. They'll keep each other on track as well. That's one thing, kind of going back to the half-hour ratio checks. I love doing half-hour ratio checks because, I can walk into a classroom with my clipboard and my pen, and, I don't even have to say, how many. I walk into the classroom and the kids will go 7, because they know what you're there for and they know what you're looking for, and they just blurt out a number. And it's so funny because, I'll walk in and the kids will scream 7, and then the teachers are like, no, kids, we have 8. Oh, wait. No, you're right. It is 7. Usually the kids are more accurate than the teacher sometimes, so I love it. But it works out really well. But I've also had situations where, I've walked into a classroom and I said, how many kids do you have? And she says 7. And I'm like, okay. And then 30 minutes later, I come back and I say, how many kids do you have? And she says 6. And I'm like, well, okay. Now, 30 minutes ago, you told me you had 7. Now you're telling me you have 6. So I don't recall anyone going home. What's up with the different? Oh, you know what, Mr. Tim? I made a mistake. I gave you the wrong number 30 minutes ago. That's an issue, all right? And that's an issue that we need to talk about because that could be a child left out on the playground right now, all right? Or a child left in the cafeteria or left on the bus. So you've got to take the attendance tracking very, very serious. But like I said, I like to get all parties involved right there. And there's a lot of other methods that y'all use to track attendance, but those are just some good examples for you. The next thing that I have on my super safety checklist is what steps do I take if there is an accident involving a child? Okay. Now, of course, this needs to be part of your policy manual. This is a required policy with licensing, but you want to make sure you go over this with your employees once again at hire and at least once or twice a year on what are your policies for handling an accident, especially if it's a head injury, all right? If you have a child that has a head injury, you don't want to move them unless it's absolutely necessary. You don't want them to lay down and go to sleep for a couple of hours after a head injury. Always contact the parent. I don't care how minor it is. Always contact the parent, whenever there's a head injury and give them a heads up right there. But go over this. In addition to what steps do I take when there's an accident involving the child, you also want to talk to them about the importance of that accident report and completing that accident report with detailed and accurate information. All right, no assumptions, no guessing, actual information. What happened to the child, what type of first aid was administered, and then you get your applicable signatures from the employee, from the director, and then eventually the parent. I know that I discussed this in my webinar on documentation, but I also wanted to throw it out here with this one. Never sign a document without reading over it and checking into it first, all right? So if you have a teacher that brings you an accident report, don't just sit there and sign it and go about your business. Read it. Susie fell down on the playground and hit her head. And then you're going to walk back to that classroom and you're going to check out Susie and look at her head before you sign it, all right? So don't blindside, sign anything right there. That can get you into some big time trouble. Claudia on Facebook Live is, or if you have an accident in the bathroom, or, a child left in the bathroom when we were talking about attendance tracking. I see where you're going with that. Yes, exactly, Claudia, you're absolutely right. Go over those steps of handling those accidents. What steps do you take if there is a vehicle accident? For those of you that are transporting children, and you want to have a detailed policy and detailed plan on what to do in the event of a vehicle accident. What steps do you take, especially if there are injuries involved, all right? What do you do in the event of a vehicle accident and your driver was at fault, all right? There's very specific things that you don't say, all right? Say and don't say in a situation like that. And the reason why, these procedures need to be so, written out, and you need to go over it with your employees, because, if you have a vehicle accident, especially if your driver is at fault, whoever the victim is, all they see is a big corporation with a lot of money that I'm about to sue. All right. So, we've got insurance for this, but you're probably going to be looking at a pretty big lawsuit, just because it's not like it's an individual and they hit you with their 1987 Honda. This is a bus that belongs to a business. So they're looking at insurance payout right there. So if you need some additional information on what steps do you take if there is a vehicle accident, get with your insurance company, all right, and let them provide you with some documentation on how they want you to handle those situations. Now, I've definitely got, a policy and a process that I could share with you that's very, very thorough in the event of an accident, but I recommend you call your insurance company, all right, because every insurance company is going to want you to handle this differently, and you want to make sure that you're handling these situations the way they want you to, all right? But you're going to go over this with your drivers right there. Mary's asking a question about accident reports. You can download the child care regulation incident report, and you can use that incident report for a record of your accidents. I don't recommend it though. For minor accidents in your program, you can make up your own form, child's name, today's date, what teachers were involved, what happened, what first aid was administered, and then get your signatures on that. The reason why I say that is that child care regulation incident report is very, very intimidating, all right? Especially for a parent to look at that. They're like, whoa, it's kind of scary. So for minor accidents, just use your simple, school form. Now, if it is an accident that you have to report to licensing, then you do need to use their report, all right? So if it's a reportable incident and it's an accident that involves treatment from a healthcare professional or hospitalization, then you would need to use licensing's form at that point, all right? So yes, and it looks like Billy is saying the same thing right there. All right. Along with the vehicle accident, do you know my child's transportation safety system? So again, for those of you that are transporting children, what are your loading and unloading procedures off of the buses and vans? How are you making sure that every child that got on your bus is also getting off of your bus? We don't want to leave children, unattended on the vehicle. And we hear about this almost every summer, where children being left on buses and vans. Now, this year, not so much because we haven't done any field trips due to the pandemic. But we are getting ready to go back to school. Some children are going to be going back to classrooms, not all of them, but some of them. So we are getting ready for these bus runs, making sure that our employees are properly trained on loading and unloading procedures. And again, this is going to look very different this year because I've included in my loading and unloading procedures a whole extra step on disinfecting. And we're going to be disinfecting that bus and the seat belts and the handrails after every single bus run, starting this school year. So it's going to take a little bit more adult time. So we're going to have to plan for that accordingly. But due to the pandemic situation that we're in, even our loading and unloading procedures are going to look very different. We're also going to be screening children before they get on our bus. So, just like the children that arrive in our programs, we're taking temperatures, we're looking for signs and symptoms. We're going to be doing that at the elementary schools when we're picking up the children as well. And of course, you need to have a policy on or a process on what are you going to do when you are at the elementary school picking up that child and they have a fever or they have a symptom. You can't just leave them at the school. So you need to come up with a plan on that one. And if you missed my webinar last week on preparing for Back to School 2020, you can go back. It's on the Facebook wall. Go back and watch that. We spent a great deal of time talking about loading and unloading, talking about the after school program and what that was going to look like, this year. All right. And making sure that you're not picking up children that don't belong to you. That's called kidnapping, if any of you are unfamiliar with that. But if you pick up a child at the elementary school that you're not supposed to be picking up, that's not good right there as well. And I've seen this happen actually many, many times that, you have the public school teacher that brings this kid and says, this kid's supposed to get on your bus. And you're like, I have no idea who he is. So, good communication on how you're going to communicate with your center and the school and all of that type of stuff. All right, moving on to the next item on my super safety checklist is, what do you do if your center has significant property damage? All right. So, really kind of think about this because again, like I said earlier, don't ever think, oh, that's not going to happen to me. But what happens if, over the weekend or in the middle of the night, you have a storm that comes in and it blows a tree down and you go to open your building at 6:30 in the morning and you have an oak tree in your toddler room. What are you going to do when there's significant property damage? Where are you going to put those toddlers? That type of thing. And you need to plan for this in advance on what would happen if I lost some, part of my program or all of my program. How am I going to continue to care for the children, or would I be able to continue to care for the children? Do you have an alternate location that in the event of a significant property damage that you can temporarily house the children and plan for this in advance? I know I've told this story before, but in my previous life, when I worked at another company, we actually had a school that caught fire and burned, and it was at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Monday. All right. So again, don't ever say that's not going to happen to me because I've seen it. Well, here we've got this building that burned. And the next day we had parents showing up to drop off their kids. And there's still like the yellow police tape around the building and the building's still smoking, but there wasn't a plan. And so, you got to come up with this ahead of time of what would I do if my building had significant property damage, and communicate that with your parents and your employees ahead of time. All right. I have on here, how do I sanitize my equipment? Now, we are all super duper experts at sanitizing and disinfecting nowadays. We've had 6 months of very intense training on enhanced health practices. But I would still, when you hire a new employee, or at least once or twice a year, go over the proper steps of sanitizing your equipment. Not just how do you sanitize your equipment, but what equipment are you sanitizing? And really think outside of the box here of, any item in your building that children could get bodily fluid on. So, handrails, the back of chairs, common areas, playground equipment. I mean, really think outside of the box on everything that we should be sanitizing, especially right now during the pandemic. All right. And have a very well written policy on your sanitizing practices. And right now we have enhanced policies on that. All right. I got a question. Would licensing have to approve the second location prior to using? Part of your emergency preparedness plan is that you do need to have a safe haven listed, or a location that you would take your children in the event of an evacuation. That does not need to be approved by licensing, just so that it'll be part of your emergency preparedness plan. Now, if you are going to have the children at that location for a period of time, then they would need to approve it, all right? But we're talking emergency situations right here. And so, they can usually get that done pretty quickly. But as far as what you list in your emergency preparedness plan, that would not need approval. But if you are going to, have the children there for an extended period of time, yes, you would want to have a conversation with your licensing rep on that. All right. What are your center's policies on laundry? And what are you washing in the washing machine there at your facility? For those of you that have a washer and dryer at your facility, again, this is where, we can't assume that everyone has common sense. And you got to, again, think outside of the box when it comes to what are you putting in your washing machine. Putting items that have blood on it, or putting items that have bodily fluid and putting that in your washing machine, if it's not done correctly, you could contaminate everything that you wash after that, all right? So, if you're putting anything in your washing machine that does have blood or a lot of bodily fluid on it, then after you do that load of laundry, you kind of need to disinfect the washing machine, including wiping around the top of the rim, the top of the lid. Don't just think because it's washing the clothes in the barrel that it's going to clean and disinfect the upper part of the washing machine, or even the sides when you're putting things in there, So that's why I'm saying sanitizing around the top of it right there. And same thing with your dryer. You probably want to add to your policies that there are certain things that you don't wash in your center's washing machine. That, items like blood or feces or urine, that you're bagging that up and you're sending it home. All right, because you don't want the risk of contaminating your entire, washing machine, which is going to just cross-contaminate all kinds of other things. All right. Sometimes people don't really think about this, and you just throw all kinds of stuff in there, But yes, and I've seen teachers ruin a lot of very expensive equipment just because it's cloth or fabric. They assume that some of those washable, or not the washable books, those are obviously washable, but I've seen people throw books and things like that in the washing machine that should not have gone in there and ruined them, or other toys and equipment that I've seen put in washing machines, and I'm like, what were you thinking, So you want to really look at your policies on what you don't put in the washing machine as well. But you would be surprised on some of the things I've seen gone in the washing machine. All right. Do you have any children that have restrictions from normal activities? All right. So again, when you're hiring new employees, and then throughout the year. Right now, we're transitioning children into new classrooms. Everyone needs to be aware of any child that has certain restrictions, especially if it's a food allergy, non-food allergy, any intolerances that the child may have. We want to make sure that we're sharing that information with our employees. And you have every right to do that. It's not a HIPAA violation. It's not a privacy violation. But you want to put in your policy manual that information is shared on an as-needed basis only. All right. But if I have this caregiver that is responsible for caring for this particular child, then they need to know if there's any restrictions or allergies or things that they need to be aware of. That's pretty important right there. And again, as children are in our program year after year, we become complacent and we make the assumption that everybody knows that if, Billy gets bit by an ant, he's going to swell up and needs an EpiPen. But then you have that one teacher that was unaware of this. They think it's a simple ant bite, no big deal. Now you've got a significant event on your hands. All right. When you're looking at your policies and your processes, again, how are you making sure that this information is shared with the caregivers? If you're having to put a sub in a classroom, you're having to move people around, you had someone call in sick, so you're having to shuffle teachers. Whatever teacher is subbing in that classroom, are they aware of any child and their restrictions or their allergies or their intolerances, those type of things? Now, of course, your food allergy emergency plans are required to be posted by child care regulations. That's actually a federal guideline that the food allergy emergency plans are posted in the classroom, but that's only food allergies. You could have a child that has, a lot of other different types of restrictions that don't have anything to do with food. So make sure that you're communicating that. What is your center's policy on summer outdoor play? So again, this is where you can't make the assumption that they know, when they can and cannot go outside on the playground. Same thing with winter outdoor play. I have that on my list too. Now, you get to write this policy. Child care regulations is basically going to say that, children go outside when weather permits, but there's really no definition of weather permits because it's going to be different for everybody. What part of the state are you in? Do you have shade? There's a lot of different factors that you have to look at when you determine what is weather permits. I typically look more at heat index and wind chill rather than the actual temperature. And I have an outdoor guideline that is based on heat index and wind chill, but then also shade play or non-shade play. So if you have a program that's got nice shade structures, your outdoor policy is going to look a little bit different than a program that doesn't have shade. All right, so these are all things that you want to look at and you want to communicate with your teachers. And then also, who is making the decision that children should not be going outside because weather is not permitting? All right. Are you the director making that call, and how are you communicating that with everybody? Or is it the individual teacher that's making that call? Some of them have their smartwatches or, hopefully not their phones in the classroom, but they're taking it upon themselves to check the temperature or check the heat index or the wind chill and deciding whether or not they're going outside. And sometimes they add or subtract a few numbers to that because they don't want to go outside or they do want to go outside. So you want a good method on who's making that decision and how are you communicating it. And if you are restricting outdoor play due to, weather conditions, please make sure that you're communicating this with your people in advance, all right? Those of you that work in a classroom or those of you that came from a classroom before you were a leader, you know what it feels like to have your kids lined up at the door and y'all are about to go outside. And then someone goes, oh, no, you can't go outside today. then you've got a lot of upset with the adult and the children who was expecting to have that physical activity and get that impulse out right there. So communicate in advance too, all right? It might be that the weather is fine outside, but you've got some construction workers doing maintenance to your playground, all right? And not everyone might be aware of that, or situations like that with landscapers. What is your policy on the use of sunscreen, all right? And I have this on my Supervision and Risk Management checklist for a couple of different reasons. Number one, we want to make sure that children are not sunburned, and we want to make sure that sunscreen is being applied appropriately. The biggest thing on this one is that if you read the bottle, of the sunscreen, it's going to tell you that typically sunscreen needs to be applied 30 minutes before going outside. But how many times have we seen the teachers, lathering up the kid and then sending them to the playground, or they're out there actually on the playground lathering up the kids? It's not going to do any good, all right? Most of them will say apply the sunscreen 30 minutes before going outside. So, that needs to be in your policies, that this is being done, in the appropriate manner. The other thing is, from a risk management standpoint, do you really want your caregiver's bare hands rubbing all over that child in their bare skin? That's a risk management nightmare right there, especially if one hand just slips and touches something that it shouldn't touch. Now you got a big time, situation on your hands. What I like to recommend, especially during the summer months here in Texas, is that parents apply the sunscreen before they bring their children in. All right, so that way it's on there ahead of time. Right now it's August, it's August 3rd. Typically, we're taking the kids outside early in the morning, and then by noon, it's too hot or the heat index is too high for them to go outside. So having the parents apply the sunscreen, before they bring them in is a perfect resolution to this right here. All right. I got a question right here. Is there a standard that mandates that we apply this? No, there's not. But what the minimum standards do say is that you just need to have a policy addressing sunscreen or bug repellent. And if you just want to draft your policy to say, we don't apply sunscreen or bug repellent, that this must be done by the parent, then that's your policy. But that's the only thing that's in the minimum standard, is that you must have a policy on sunscreen or bug repellent. I know a lot of people, just again for the risk management part of it, that sunscreen that is sent in by the parent needs to be the spray. All right, so that you can just kind of spray the kid down and then you don't have to worry about the bare skin. I'm not a big fan of the school providing the sunscreen, just because you have so many different, sensitivities, skin sensitivities to different things. Therefore I like it when the parents provide these products and then that it's safe for that individual child. Whether you're providing the sunscreen and bug repellent or the parent is supplying these, I would still make sure you have written permission in both cases. Now, child care regulations is going to say that if the parent supplies the sunscreen or the bug repellent, then permission is implied. I still like to get that written permission either way. All right. So again, CYA. All right. Cover your assets. All right. Very good. The next thing I have on my super safety checklist are, what are your guidelines for illness exclusion? So at what point are we going to send a child home, and how long must they be excluded from your program? And typically, we say that the child must be fever-free, symptom-free, without medication for at least 24 hours. That's our normal policy that we've had for many years. Right now, due to the pandemic, most of us have changed our illness exclusion to match the CDC recommendations which is 72 hours fever-free, symptom-free, without medication. And when you're writing your policies and you're having these conversations with the parents, always make sure that you include that fever-free, symptom-free without medication. All right. Otherwise, they're going to try to mask it and hide it. And, we've all had that happen right there. Very good. And again, I don't want to go down the COVID rabbit hole, but, seasonal allergies and, sinus issues, those type of things. Yes, those symptoms are similar to COVID symptoms. And so you might get some pushback that, the child just has seasonal allergies. I get it. I understand it. But what if it's not? All right. And if you make an exception for a family and they end up being positive with COVID, you got a big O situation on your hands now. And I know of a particular center right now that has a positive parent. And for a week, the mom kept telling the director, oh, don't worry, this is just my allergies. I get bad like this every year, and continued to bring her child for an entire week. And then finally went to the doctor and tested positive for COVID. It was not her seasonal allergies. That child was in that program for a week, exposing everybody else. So was not a good situation for sure. What are your policies on dispensing medication? And who is dispensing medication in your program? You may have a situation where you just don't administer medication. That's actually a big trend right now. A lot of people are adopting policies that they're just not dispensing medication. Now, if you decide to adopt a no medication policy, you need to keep in mind that there are certain medications that are protected under ADA law, the Americans with Disability Act, and some medications are considered a reasonable accommodation to a special need, such as EpiPens, behavioral management drugs, children with diabetes and doing blood sugar testing, breathing machines, all right? These are all considered reasonable accommodations to a special need. So those you have to do, all right? But otherwise, if you want to have a no medication policy, that's something you might want to consider because there's a lot of risk by giving medication, all right? Giving the wrong dosage, giving the wrong child the wrong medication. My biggest fear is giving the medication to the child, not knowing what mom and dad gave them at home before they sent them in, and now the kid is overdosing. There's just so many factors right there. All right. My current policy that we have is that we will only give medication that is prescribed 3 or more times a day, and we will only give the middle dose. All right. So if you have a child that is on amoxicillin or whatever, and they only get it 1 time a day, that parent can give it at home. There is no reason for you to take on that risk when they can give it at home. If the child is prescribed that medicine twice a day, again, they can give it before they bring them. They can give it when the kid gets home. There's no reason for you to take on that risk if the parent can do it before and after your program. So that's why I say, 3 or more times a day, and we're only going to give the middle dose. And I definitely recommend that you always send medication home with the family every night. All right. You don't want to keep the medication in your school because then it seems to get left and it stays there. And next thing you know, you've got a big old box full of expired medication. Licensing comes in, you're going to get cited for it. All right. So I like to recommend that you send that home. But make sure you're going over with your staff and you're communicating what are your policies on administering medication. How do you communicate with the employee that they have a child in their classroom that needs medication that day? And are they familiar with the medication and possible side effects? These are things that you need to communicate right there. That's why I have it on my super safety checklist for supervision and risk management. All right. So, and I see on Facebook Live, Stephanie's pretty smart. She only dispenses medication that is prescribed by a healthcare professional, and no over-the-counter medication. That's a pretty smart policy, in my opinion, because again, you've got a lot of risk. If you do give over-the-counter medication, it must be given exactly as listed on the bottle, okay? So it'll have a little chart and it will tell you, what they get right there. I still like documentation from the healthcare professional if possible, or you can do what Stephanie is doing and just not giving any over-the-counter. That's your prerogative right there. All right. So EpiPens, like I said, is considered a reasonable accommodation to a special need. So those you do have to give. But you want to make sure that you're practicing with your teachers too. So again, once or twice a year, you can go to the drugstore and get some testers and some grapefruits, and you can test administering an EpiPen. You probably are doing this in your first aid training, CPR first aid training. Some of the instructors do that, but I think that's a smart thing, especially if you have a lot of children with EpiPens. And reminder that one of the new policies that will be required coming up towards the end of the year with child care regulations is that we're going to be required to have a policy on EpiPens. All right. Do I require the EpiPens to be sent home? No, that's a good question. Those are the only thing, that's the only one that we'll keep in the center is the EpiPens. All right. Everything else, your augmentin and your, things like that, we send home every night. But your EpiPens, we do keep in the center. Something else that I wanted to share with y'all when we talk about EpiPens is that I strongly recommend that your EpiPens be stored in the classroom. They need to be, out of the reach of children in a locked container. So if you can put it in a cabinet in your classroom, I think that's best. There is nothing in the child care minimum standards that says EpiPens must be stored in the front office. All right, I hear that often from people. Well, my licensing rep said that it has to be in the office. Nope, there's nothing in there that says that. Any of y'all that have experience with EpiPens, someone that goes into shock and you have to administer that EpiPen, you have a very short window of time to administer that EpiPen for it to be effective. And if that child is in a pre-K classroom that's in the back of the building and your office is all the way in the front of the building and that kid goes into shock, by the time you call up to the front office, I need Sally's EpiPen, you have to go to the box and find it, and then you run it back to the classroom, you've probably missed your window. All right, so you're going to need to look at your individual building and your premises and make a decision that's in the best interest of your school. But I like to recommend that EpiPens are kept in the classroom, out of the reach of children in a locked container, but close enough that the teachers have quick access to it. All right, and I also want you to think, what are some of the most common reasons for an EpiPen? Typically bee stings, ant bites. Where are those going to take place? Out on the playground, all right? So again, if you have a group of children out on the playground and you've got that EpiPen up in the front office, then you've really got a risk of losing your window right there. All right, so we've kind of already talked about, do you have any children with severe allergies? We talked about that when we talked about children with restrictions. But again, a good process for communicating with your teachers about children with allergies. Do you have any children with diabetes? All right, we do have this from time to time. And like I said, doing blood sugar testing is considered a reasonable accommodation to a special need. So you might run into a situation where you're required to do blood sugar testing. Now, nowadays, they have all kinds of fancy ways of doing it that doesn't involve the pricking of the finger and the blood and everything. But, from time to time, you might have this, so come up with a plan. On the breathing treatments, I got a question here on Facebook Live. So if you have a child that has a breathing treatment, again, that is considered a reasonable accommodation to a special need under the Americans with Disability Act. So if you have a child that's been prescribed a breathing treatment by a healthcare professional, that is something you would need to administer according to the healthcare professional's prescription. All right. But again, my policy is that either the director and the assistant director does the breathing treatment. We don't have the teachers do the breathing treatments. And we want to do it in a way that doesn't shame or embarrass the child. So you don't want to do the breathing treatment in the classroom in front of all of the other children. You want to do it in a discreet way that doesn't shame or embarrass the child. But again, you're going to have to look at your program and your building premises and decide what that looks like for you. How do you store children's personal items? All right. And I have this on my super safety checklist for supervision and risk management because children like to smuggle a lot of stuff into your building. They bring a lot of things in from home. I could probably do a 5-hour webinar just telling you about all of the different things that I've had brought in from home over the years. Some very crazy and personal stuff that has come in from home. So, you need to make sure that when kids are bringing in their backpack or whatnot, that you are kind of going through that and seeing what's in there. Because once it comes into your program, you're responsible for it now. And you could have a child that brings something into your program that's very harmful, all right? And are you storing the children's personal items in a way that doesn't cross-contaminate or touch the other kids' stuff? That's kind of a big thing right now is that, we want to be very careful with what's coming in from home because that might be how your illnesses are coming in is, some of the items that are coming in from home, all right? We actually, with our enhanced health practices right now, is we are not allowing anything in from home. The only thing that mom and dad are sending in are the extra changes of clothes, and we're requesting 3 changes of clothes so that we've got a good adequate supply per child. But otherwise, we're not allowing anything in from home right now. So to do that, we had to go out and we bought, blankets and pillows and nap time equipment. We had to make that investment. But again, we just want to avoid that cross-contamination. And then also, when you have parents that bring in a pillow and blanket for their child, the 2-year-old is coming in with a king-size comforter and a body pillow. And there's no way you can store that in their little cubby. And then it's touching everybody else's stuff, and that could be harmful. All right. What is your center's policy on cell phone use? Now, we've had this in our child care minimum standards for 10 years now, all right, about personal use of electronic devices. It's still such a huge issue in all of our programs. So, do you even allow these in the classroom? We provide lockers for our employees, and so all of their personal items go into their locker. So the only thing that goes in the classroom is the teacher. All of you have kind of different policies on this. I just want to protect you from being cited by licensing. And I've seen many situations where, a teacher's cell phone is just sitting on a cabinet and licensing comes in and they'll cite you. I had a school down in San Antonio that got cited for this. And they said she wasn't using her cell phone. It was just sitting on the cubby. And licensing said, yes, but the intent to use it was there. And that if that phone would have vibrated or rang, that teacher is going to go over there and look at it and see who it was. So the intent to use it was there. And when the center called me to ask me to help them with an administrative review, I was kind of like, I have to agree with licensing. The intent to use it was there. All right. So, I'm seeing Stephanie. She doesn't even allow cell phones past her office. So I think that's a smart thing right there. We're very, very attached to these items these days, aren't we? Yes. Are you current on your CPR and your first aid? And what type of system do you have in place to make sure that all of your employees are current with their first aid and CPR? And especially as of October of 2018, you know that all of your caregivers are required to be current in CPR and first aid. Once they expire, they can't be counted in child staff ratio. I had an employee just a couple of months ago that we had a CPR class scheduled. We told everyone a couple of weeks in advance, hey, you know, your CPR is about to expire. You need to come to this class on Tuesday night. Well, Tuesday morning, this teacher shows up and says, oh, something came up and I'm not going to be able to make it to CPR tonight. And so, you know, my director had to say, well, your CPR expires on Thursday. So you've got between now and Thursday to go get your CPR certification renewed, or you basically don't have a job anymore, you know, because you can't let that lapse anymore. So, you know, it was, she magically, her evening freed up and she was able to attend CPR class. All right. So make sure you've got a good process for keeping up with this. You don't want your people to be expired out there. And y'all know right now, if you are having an issue getting a CPR instructor to come out and do your instructor-led CPR certification, you can apply for a waiver with child care licensing. But I will tell you, we haven't had any problems getting CPR instructors out to keep our people current. But it might be different in the area that you live in. I got 2 things left on my super safety checklist for supervision and risk management. Do you open or close your center alone? I strongly encourage you to have a policy that there can never be one adult alone in the building, all right? That there always needs to be at least 2 adults in the building. When you're opening, when you're closing, you know, you just never know who might be inside of your building waiting for you. And if you're coming in by yourself, bad things could happen. You definitely never want to be the only adult in the building with a child. Okay, so if you have a child that's late being picked up, you know, have at least 2 adults that are there with that child. But, you know, the way we've always done it is that if you're an opener, you know, you sit in your car, if you're the first one there until someone else shows up, and then you all walk in as a group. Okay. And again, I can tell you scary stories about walking into centers, you know, at 6:15 in the morning and walking into some crazy situations. You don't want to be the only one walking into that. All right. Tina's saying that she's always made it mandatory for all of her staff to be certified in first aid and CPR. I think that's smart. Most of us have always done that as well. I think that was just good management. Now, as of October 2018, it's required for everybody. Yeah, Stephanie says, Casper, the friendly ghost, is always here with me. I've actually worked at a program. I was a director at a program for many years that I swear was haunted, all right? I could tell you all crazy stories about that place too. And I have been alone in that building and it kind of freaked me out, all right? We're not going to go down that path, but you just never know. You never know. I have a webinar coming up in the near future on professional development, so I don't want to give away too much. But one thing we're going to talk about is, you know, we've always married CPR and first aid. You know, we married them together, they're husband and wife. It's time for CPR and first aid to get a divorce, all right? And y'all need to separate CPR and first aid now for several different reasons why, you know, I'm telling you this. You know, reason number 1 is that first aid is a training, CPR is a certification. And when we talk about wage and hour laws, there are different laws for training and meetings versus a certification. All right. So that's one reason. But the other reason is that as of October of 2018, you cannot have a teacher left alone in a classroom until they have completed their first aid training. Where with CPR, licensing is giving us 90 days for a new employee to get their CPR certification. So another reason why we need to unmarry these two, we've done that for years, that we've just lumped them together. I'll get more into that when we do our webinar on professional development. And then the last thing I have on my super safety checklist for supervision and risk management is, what do I do in the event of weather emergencies? All right, so you have severe weather, you have a tornado, you have hail, you have wind, you have lightning. All right, what are your policies? How are you practicing this? Where are you taking the children? And make sure that you are practicing this at least four times a year, as required by child care regulations. But I want y'all to think of every possible scenario. Now, I live up in North Texas, so we practice severe weather often because, especially during the springtime, we have sirens going off all the time. If that siren goes off and you go into a lockdown, document that as your severe weather drill, okay? But then, like I said, practice it with your employees. And I will tell you that whenever I do a staff meeting and we go over our emergency preparedness plan, and we go over our severe weather drills, we go over our lockdown and intruder drills, I know that we always want to make trainings fun and motivating and, lighthearted sometimes. Not with these trainings, okay? When you're doing your emergency preparedness trainings, when you're doing your severe weather, we need to be very serious, and we need to practice as if this is actually happening. Now, I will tell you from experience too, because I've had a couple of situations where, we've had some severe incidents. It's amazing how your adrenaline will kick in, and you do what you got to do to keep everyone safe. I've had so many teachers, I just don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it if we have an actual emergency. You'd be surprised how your adrenaline just, kicks in, and, you do what you got to do, and your people are taken care of. But make sure you're practicing it, making sure you're going over this. So again, this is my super safety checklist for supervision and risk management. You can download this off of my website, timthetrainer.com, under documents. For those of you that want some help on writing or rewriting your policies and your processes, I've got two resources that I will share with you. Of course, one of them is our Child Care Survival Guide. And this entire book is full of sample policies and processes and checklists and forms. This is for sale on my website. Go to Training Modules for Sale. And everything in this book is on a CD-ROM, so you can put your logo on it. You can change it up. You can change whatever you want, add stuff to it. But you can see it's a lot of information. We talked about transportation policies and drop-off and pickup policies and how to handle emergencies, outdoor procedures, playground procedures, all of that stuff I have in here. Most of everything that we went over on this list, I've got in here. But another really awesome resource that I'm going to refer you to is this book right here called Caring for Our Children, and it's the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs. This book right here is also full of really, really, really good information. It's a national publication. And I posted this on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. So if you just scroll back through my wall, you can probably find it. But this is an amazing, amazing resource for your program as well. So that was a lot of information that we went over in our webinar today. So I hope you learned something. I hope that your brain is clicking and reflecting, and you're thinking about things that you need to enhance in your program. Or hopefully you're thinking, wow, you know what? It has been a while since I've talked to my employees about this topic or that topic. Maybe it's time for a good reminder or a follow-up or a refresh on some of these topics. Like I said at the beginning, The last 6 months, we've put so much focus on COVID and enhanced health practices. I thought it would be a really good idea for us to talk about the other things in our program that we need to be prepared for. COVID is not the only thing that could happen to your program. We don't want to become complacent. We want to be on top of our game, and we definitely want to make sure that everybody is prepared so that we can maintain a safe environment for our children. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see all of you very, very soon. And I will have the worksheet for this webinar posted on Facebook momentarily. All right. Bye, everybody.